Introduction. When love feels real, but your spirit is uneasy. There is a quiet paradox of faith that few people dare to name. Not everything that looks like love brings life. Some relationships appear right from the outside: steady presence, gentle words, consistent care. Nothing obvious is wrong, and yet deep within, your spirit is unsettled. Not afraid, not angry, just uneasy, subtle, persistent, impossible to ignore. And so you begin to question yourself. Am I being too sensitive? Am I overthinking this? But each time you pray, the uneasiness doesn't leave. It remains silent, patient, like a whisper that refuses to fade. Scripture tells us, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." Peace is not merely a pleasant emotion. Peace is a spiritual indicator of alignment. When peace is absent, it is not always because you are weak. Sometimes, it is because God is teaching you to see more clearly. We often expect God to warn us through dramatic events, but many times, He warns us through small spiritual discomforts. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just the sense that you are shrinking when you are near someone. Your faith feels quieter, your light feels dimmer. You speak less truth to preserve harmony, and you call it love. Yet Scripture also says, "Test the spirits to see whether they are from God." Not so you become suspicious of people, but so you protect your soul. If you are here right now, it may not be accidental. God is not condemning you. He may be training you, training your discernment, teaching you not to trade truth for closeness, teaching you not to rename uneasiness as love. There are moments when God does not remove the relationship immediately. Instead, He sharpens your awareness. He allows you to feel what is off, so you learn to recognize what is true. And perhaps today is one of those moments, a moment to pause, to listen to that quiet whisper, and to choose faith, not driven by emotion, but guided by clarity and peace. Part 1. Why fake love is so hard to recognize, especially when you care. Here is another paradox of faith that often goes unnoticed. The most dangerous love is rarely obvious. It doesn't arrive with cruelty. It doesn't announce itself with hatred. It comes gently, patiently, often wrapped in familiarity. And that is precisely why it's so hard to recognize, especially when your heart is sincere. Fake love does not look fake at first. It listens. It shows up. It says the right things at the right time. It may even sacrifice for you, and because you care, you assume the best. Because you value loyalty, you explain away the warning signs. Because you believe in grace, you silence discernment. You tell yourself, no one is perfect. Love means enduring. I shouldn't judge. But Scripture quietly reminds us, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4:23. Notice what it does not say. It does not say, explain everything away. It does not say, endure what drains your soul. It says guard, because some things do not wound you by force, but by access. The reason fake love confuses us is because it often imitates real love. It borrows the language, it mirrors the gestures. But over time, something subtle begins to shift. You feel heavier, not lighter, smaller, not strengthened. Your faith becomes quieter around them. Prayer feels harder. Truth feels inconvenient. And without realizing it, you begin adjusting who you are to preserve who they are. The Bible describes this with unsettling clarity. Their talk is smooth as butter, yet war is in their hearts. Psalms 55:21. Smooth words are not proof of pure intentions. Consistency is not the same as alignment, and closeness is not the same as covenant. What makes this even harder is that fake love rarely feels malicious. Sometimes the other person doesn't even know they are draining you. But intent does not cancel impact. Scripture tells us, even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:14, not to frighten us, but to remind us that appearance alone is never the test. When you care deeply, you are especially vulnerable. Love makes you patient. Compassion makes you tolerant. Faith makes you hopeful. These are virtues, but without discernment, they can become open doors. And God never asks you to sacrifice truth on the altar of closeness. Jesus himself loved perfectly, yet he did not entrust himself to everyone. Scripture says he knew what was in man. John 2:24-25. This is where faith matures. Not when you learn to love harder, but when you learn to love wiser. Discernment is not the enemy of love. It is the guardian of it. And caring does not require you to stay blind. So if something feels off, don't rush to silence it. Bring it into the light. Pray honestly. Ask God not just to fix the relationship, but to clarify your vision. Because sometimes the most faithful step is not holding on longer, but allowing God to teach you what love is and what it is not. Part 2. The quiet way God teaches you discernment through daily discomfort. Here is another paradox of faith that many believers misunderstand. God rarely teaches discernment through fear. He teaches it through discomfort. Not panic, not chaos, not sudden destruction, but small, persistent unease woven into ordinary days. Discomfort that does not shout. Discomfort that does not rush you. Discomfort that simply stays. We often assume that if something is wrong, God will make it obvious. We expect warning signs that are loud and unmistakable. But Scripture shows us something gentler and far more demanding. Be still and know that I am God. Psalms 46:10. Stillness is where discernment grows, and daily discomfort is often the classroom. This is how it usually begins. Nothing dramatic happens. No betrayal, no confrontation. Just moments where your spirit hesitates. Conversations that leave you unsettled. Advice that sounds wise but pulls you subtly away from truth. You don't feel attacked. You feel off. And because it seems so small, you tell yourself it doesn't matter. But Scripture reminds us, do not despise these small beginnings. Zechariah 4:10. God often trains discernment, not by removing people immediately, but by sharpening your awareness while they are still present. He allows the discomfort to repeat, day after day, until you stop ignoring it. Daily discomfort has a purpose. It exposes patterns. You begin to notice how your prayers change, how your joy dims, how you hesitate to speak honestly, how your faith feels quieter when certain voices are near. This is not coincidence. This is instruction. Scripture says, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit. Romans 8:16. God does not only speak through Scripture on the page, he speaks through the witness within. And yet, this is the moment many believers resist, because discomfort demands patience. It asks you to observe instead of react, to pray instead of explain, to listen instead of justify. We want clarity without tension, answers without waiting, but discernment matures slowly, like muscle, not lightning. Jesus modeled this kind of wisdom. He did not rush to entrust himself to everyone. Scripture says, he did not need anyone to testify about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. John 2:25. That knowledge did not come from suspicion. It came from communion with the Father. Discernment is born in relationship with God, not in reaction to people. Here is the truth we must face. God sometimes leaves you in mild discomfort because he is preparing you for deeper clarity. If he removed every uneasy situation immediately, you would never learn to see. You would only learn to escape. But God is not just interested in rescuing you. He is committed to forming you. So don't rush to numb the discomfort. Don't silence it with excuses. Bring it into prayer. Ask God not, "Should I leave?" first, but "What are you teaching me to see?" Because when discernment is learned this way, it does more than protect you from one relationship. It reshapes how you walk through all of them. And perhaps today, the step of faith is not dramatic action. It is attentive obedience, staying awake, trusting that the quiet discomfort you feel is not confusion, but God, patiently training your sight. Part 3. Signs God is opening your eyes, in your relationships, not just your prayers. Here is a truth that often surprises believers. God does not only open your eyes in prayer, he opens them in relationships. We expect revelation to come quietly on our knees, and sometimes it does. But very often, clarity arrives while you are standing in real life, navigating real people, feeling real tension. God teaches discernment, not just in the stillness of devotion, but in the friction of connection. One of the first signs God is opening your eyes is this. You start noticing what you used to excuse. Words that once felt harmless now feel misaligned. Jokes that once seemed small now feel heavy. Advice that once sounded caring now feels subtly controlling. Nothing dramatic has changed, you have. Scripture says, "The discerning heart seeks knowledge." Proverbs 15:14. Discernment sharpens perception before it changes circumstances. Another sign is quieter, but unmistakable. Your peace becomes selective. You can pray well, worship deeply, feel close to God, until certain conversations happen. Then something shifts. Your spirit tightens. Your clarity fades. The Bible tells us, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts." Colossians 3:15. Peace is not a reward for agreement. It is a ruler. When peace consistently lives in specific relational spaces, God is not punishing you. He is pointing something out. You may also notice that your voice begins to change. You speak less freely. You filter truth more carefully. You start rehearsing words before saying them. Not because you are growing in wisdom, but because you are growing cautious. Love that is aligned with God invites honesty. Love that is misaligned requires editing. Jesus warned us that a tree is known by its fruit. Matthew 12:33. Fruit shows up not only in actions but in atmosphere. What grows in you when you are near someone? Another sign God is opening your eyes is this. Distance brings clarity. When you step back, even briefly, your thoughts settle, your prayers flow, your joy returns. This is not selfishness. This is feedback. God often confirms discernment, not by pressure to stay, but by peace when you pause. If stepping away restores life, something about staying was draining it. Here is where many believers hesitate, because these signs don't accuse anyone. They don't label the other person as evil, and that makes them easy to dismiss. But discernment is not about assigning blame. It is about recognizing alignment. Scripture says, "The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit." Romans 8:16. God's guidance often comes as witness, not warning sirens. So what do you do when you begin to see? You don't rush to cut off. You don't rush to confront. You start by honoring what God is revealing. You stop arguing with clarity. You stop calling conviction confusion. And you begin to ask a braver prayer. Lord, help me respond to what you're showing me, not what I wish were true. Because when God opens your eyes, it is not to isolate you. It is to protect your calling, to preserve your peace, and to teach you how to walk in love with truth intact. Part 4. Why letting go feels wrong, even when God is warning you. Here is one of the hardest paradoxes of faith to accept. Obedience often feels like betrayal before it feels like freedom. When God begins to warn you about a relationship, letting go rarely feels holy at first. It feels cruel, disloyal, wrong. Everything inside you resists it, not because God is unclear, but because your heart has learned attachment faster than truth. Letting go feels wrong because love has trained you to stay, to endure, to explain, to hope. You were taught that walking away means you failed, that if you cared enough, prayed enough, loved hard enough, things would eventually align. And so when God whispers, "This is costing you more than you realize," your instinct is not relief, it is guilt. Scripture speaks directly into this tension. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death. Sometimes the right way feels right because it is familiar, not because it is life-giving. God's warnings rarely arrive as thunder. More often they arrive as a growing weight on your spirit, a fatigue that prayer alone does not fix, a sorrow that lifts only when distance appears. Letting go also feels wrong because obedience threatens the story you told yourself. You imagined longevity, shared purpose, a future that made sense. Releasing that vision feels like losing part of yourself. But Jesus said something sobering and freeing. "Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." God never asks you to release what gives life, only what quietly replaces him. There is another reason letting go feels so painful. Love and responsibility get tangled. You begin to believe it is your job to hold everything together, to carry what the other person refuses to face, to be the bridge, the buffer, the peacekeeper. But Scripture reminds us, each one should carry their own load. Discernment clarifies boundaries. It exposes where compassion ends and codependence begins. Even Abraham struggled here. God asked him to release what he loved most, not because God wanted loss, but because God wanted order. Isaac was never meant to replace God in Abraham's heart, and some relationships in our lives were never meant to sit on the throne they slowly occupy. When God warns you, it is not because he is harsh. It is because he is jealous for your freedom. So what does faith look like in this moment? Not dramatic exits, not angry declarations. Faith looks like honesty, like saying, "Lord, this hurts, but I trust you more than I trust my fear." Faith looks like choosing clarity over comfort, obedience over explanation, peace over approval. Letting go feels wrong because your flesh is losing control, but your spirit is gaining alignment. If God is warning you, do not harden your heart. Do not argue with conviction. Step forward, not into certainty, but into trust. Because on the other side of release is not emptiness, it is space. Space for healing, space for truth, space for the kind of love that does not ask you to disappear in order to stay. And today, that step of faith may simply be this: stop holding what God is asking you to place back into his hands. Part 5. Discernment is God's protection, even when it costs you emotionally. Here is one of the most difficult truths to accept in the life of faith. God's protection does not always feel gentle. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like walking away from something that mattered deeply, while trusting that God sees what you cannot yet explain. Discernment is not God withholding love from you. It is God shielding your soul. even when that shield presses against your emotions. We often expect protection to feel comforting, reassuring, clear. But Scripture tells a deeper story. The Lord disciplines the one he loves. Hebrews 12:6. Discipline here is not punishment. It is direction, and direction, when it corrects our attachment, almost always costs something. Discernment hurts because it interrupts emotional investment. You gave time, trust, vulnerability, hope. Letting go feels like admitting it mattered, and that pain tempts us to conclude, if this hurts so much, it must be wrong. But pain is not proof of error. Pain is often the price of alignment. Jesus himself said, "If your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off." Matthew 5:30. Not because the hand is evil, but because the loss is smaller than the damage it prevents. This is why discernment often feels emotionally expensive. It asks you to value truth over familiarity, peace over approval, obedience over explanation. It invites you to grieve what you hoped for, without vilifying what was. Scripture reassures us. God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. 1 Corinthians 14:33. If confusion increases the longer you stay, and peace returns the moment you step back, that contrast is not coincidence. It is communication. Another hard truth: discernment can isolate you temporarily. Not because God is removing community, but because he is refining dependence. When certain voices fall away, God's voice becomes clearer. When emotional noise quiets, spiritual direction sharpens. My sheep hear my voice. Jesus says, John 10:27, discernment trains you to recognize that voice, even when following it costs you comfort. And yes, discernment costs, emotionally, because love is still present. Protection does not require hatred. Distance does not require bitterness. God never asks you to harden your heart. He asks you to guard it. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4:23. Guarding means choosing what has access to your inner life. It means allowing God to set boundaries you were too tender to enforce alone. So what does faith look like here? It looks like trusting that God's no is not rejection. It is redirection. It looks like releasing the need to be understood by everyone in order to be aligned with God. It looks like believing that emotional pain now can spare deeper spiritual damage later. If discernment is costing you emotionally, do not conclude that you misheard God. It may be the clearest sign that you heard him correctly. So take the step that feels small but faithful. Honor the clarity God has given you, and trust this promise: the Lord will guard your going out and your coming in. Psalms 121:8. Protection may ache, but it saves. And discernment, even when it hurts, is proof that God is still holding you. Conclusion: you didn't lose love. You gained clarity and peace. Here is the final paradox of faith that reframes everything you've heard. What feels like loss is often the evidence of protection. When a relationship ends, or when your heart loosens its grip, it is tempting to believe you failed at love. But Scripture tells a steadier truth. The Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. What you gained was not distance for its own sake. You gained clarity, and clarity is a form of mercy. Clarity does not shout. It settles. It brings your breathing back. It restores your prayers. It gives language to what your spirit already knew, but your emotions were too loyal to admit. God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. If peace has begun to return, even quietly, then God has been faithful. Peace is not an afterthought. It is confirmation. You didn't lose love. You lost the pressure to perform for it. You lost the habit of editing your truth. You lost the exhaustion of carrying what was never yours to carry. And in exchange, God gave you something far more enduring, a heart aligned with truth. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Freedom does not always feel joyful at first, but it always feels honest. Some of you are grieving not a person, but a version of the future you imagined. That grief is real. God does not dismiss it. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. Close, not disappointed. Close, not distant. He draws near in moments like this, not to shame you for caring, but to steady you as you learn to walk with clearer eyes. Now comes the invitation, not to harden, not to rush, but to honor what God has revealed. Let discernment become your companion, not your fear. Let peace become your guide, not your reward. And let love, real love, find you again, this time without asking you to disappear in order to stay. So take the step of faith that feels quiet but courageous. Stop arguing with clarity. Stop calling conviction confusion, and trust the God who sees beyond your emotions into your future. Because you didn't lose love, you gained wisdom, you gained peace, and you gained the freedom to love again with truth intact and your soul at rest.